Okay, I'm sure this is just a review. We are all deaf and hard of hearing like specialists and we know how to do this, but I don't know about you, like, I just like to review. Yes, Heidi?
Somebody made the comment that on Zoom that they can't hear us, so if you'll just maybe like repeat the questions that we say or whatever.
Okay, thanks for the reminder.
And can the interpreter be seen? I'm just making sure before it was saying that, and now.
Oh, Vince?
I mean.
Can I just say, this is amazing, like, it only requires you to write 3 sentences.
Like, in my office, I have some of these things like that. And it's literally like,
Thank you. I'm glad you're being aware of that.
I think it's fun, I'm thankful that everybody makes yes.
Thanks, Liz and Alyssa, for the cute bags and the stuff in it.
It's like, okay, we can do this, and then I got the spiral one, so leave it here.
Okay, let's get through this and then we'll have lunch and hopefully a short day. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about language sampling. It's just a review. We need to know language levels and skills of students and age-appropriate milestones for them and what the next steps are. So for example, if you work in preschool, you need to know that typical 3 to 4 year olds are answering simple who, what, and where questions. So sometimes you might have like, you're working with a kid that's, you know, like typically higher than maybe some of your other deaf and hard of hearing kids, but when you compare them to a typical kid, you're like, wow, they're still, you know, they're still delayed. So really knowing what an actual typical child this age is at is really helpful. And they are using pronouns like I, you, me, we. They're using all of them and plural words. And they can tell a story and they understand yesterday and summer. And some of them tell full on like stories about, you know, family trip that they went on. And you might have a kid that you feel like, oh, my kid's doing really well. And then you look at a typical 3 to 4, you're like, yeah, they're still missing things. Same thing with language milestones, you know, at 4 to 5. And, you know, like they're able to keep a conversation going. They can follow like more complex directions. So we just really need to remember and understand the content, form, and use. So the semantics, vocabulary, having, you know, like what kind of world knowledge do they have? The form, like the grammar of it, the syntax. Are they having like complete structured sentences? And a really other important one is like the area of pragmatics. I think we know that a lot of our kids that we work with are delayed in that and the language using that. And it's important because especially the ones out in mainstream schools, like this is really important because most kids their age, they have these developed skills. So we use assessments. We test, you know, we look at where they're at. There's many tools like, you know, you go to a doctor's office and they'll give you like a sheet. Hey, your child, you know, their language milestones are this, 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 and this, you know. So there might be like a sheet out there with a list of it. We have checklists, which if someone wouldn't mind handing out all the CASEL folders, because we're going to look at them in a little bit. But we have standardized tests that look at it. So we do those. And then all these standardized tests, though, are normed on typically hearing children. Yes, thank you. So just some examples of some of the standardized tests we use. We will give a self. OWLS is a big one that we'll give to kids out in the mainstream. PLS 5 for the cute little preschoolers. We've got the EVT, the PPVT, the EOW, the ROW, and the Bracken. The Bracken's another really good one to kind of test where they're at with like academics. And the vocabulary within that, concepts. But we also have informal assessments, which are just as important and a lot of times can give us more information about where a child is performing and what their levels of skills are. And this is just an example that there are lots of checklists out there. As we know, the CASELs, look at them, there's a lot to it, which is really nice because it can help you see what some of those gaps are in kids. And I know I've asked the preschool teachers on the campuses to just, you know, update this like 3 times a year. And it's overwhelming sometimes when you're looking at a class of like 8 kids and you're analyzing the language samples and you're plotting out the castles, but it's a checklist. It's to give you an idea of where your students at, find some of those gaps that you can incorporate in your lessons, and then know where to go next. There's the tags, the tassel. So there's other checklists out there. They're not as detailed as castles. Castle is very detailed. And so how do we fill these out? Well, first we need a language sample. So this addresses the weaknesses, and it gives us information about how they're able to use their language in like real world situations. So when we do a language sample, we get a snapshot of what their utterance length are, which is really important. The complexity of the language, articulation, you know, we can kind of see what speech errors they're using. Sometimes they'll also help you know like what they can hear. You know, if they're like dropping sounds all of a sudden, it's like, maybe we need to like contact our audiologist because they might not be hearing that sound. Perspective taking, can they answer a question? Are they even responding to you when you say, hey, what's that? And they're like, Mom, like, okay, you just said a word, but there's no context here. And then sometimes like they're not to a point where, you know, they're really coming up with stuff they're imitating, and that's something that you can mark down too, like, okay, we're only doing imitation stuff. So language sampling can give a lot of information. And then of course, we can see some direction following abilities. So how do you obtain a language sample? It's not really, there's not like an established protocol, but there are some guidelines to use when doing this. So what's really great, but it's a lot of work, is just record them. Like record a conversation you're having with them, and then you got to go back and listen to it and transcribe it. Sometimes if you have enough kids, it's not using like 8 long word utterances and, you know, like big long utterances. You can typically, like I've been able to write down what they're doing, and then I'll go back and have the video support. But sometimes it's a lot easier just to record it, have conversations, do whatever you're going to do, and then go back and just listen to it again. A good language sample is considered to be around 100 utterances. Some say like 50. We'll do 50 with some of our preschoolers at USDB because it takes a lot to get 50. And then others, you have no problem getting like a 200, you know, utterance sample. But the biggest thing is to pre-plan and go in prepared. So like have lots of things to like support that. Because as we know, in language, there's different areas that you use language. So if you're telling a story about your family, you're going to use different language than you're going to use when you're giving directions on how to make a peanut butter and jam sandwich. And so having different narratives and different opportunities will give you a bigger snapshot of where the kids are at. A lot of work, but it gives you a lot of information. So, yes, Kelly.
Jamie included me in such a good tool within Notes on an iPad that it will just kind of live caption it.
So there's Notes on the iPad that live captions.
Notes, and then you push the microphone and it dictates, so it picks up what the kids are saying, but it's not always 100% accurate. So you kind of have to watch what the kid is saying at the same time and just write down. So if the kid they say some word and you know that's wrong, you just make a little note like they fixed it or they got it wrong.
So you found that really helpful. Okay.
Kind of watching what they're saying at the same time that you're writing stuff down, having a conversation.
So Jamie was just sharing that there is on the iPad, if you're doing a dictation, that it'll write or copy down what the kids are saying. And then you can, if it has an error, that you can hurry and mark it out. So that would take time. Not take as much time doing that either. So I know a big thing.
Poor man's version.
I know a big thing that was done for a long time is just taking a running language sample of what a kid is saying. And while it's great, yes, and it's a quick and easy way to do it, it doesn't really provide a true representation of the child's language skills because you have no context of how they're using these utterances at all. You just know they're saying them and they're using this language, but it may not be like conversational competence. It may not go with what you're working on. So this is not a good example. So if you pre-plan, come up with your method. What materials are you going to use? And then of course the setting and context is really important for that. So plan your methods. These are the ways you're going to elicit that language sample. So conversations, sometimes just sitting having a conversation with a kid and talking to them about things that they love. They will get you can get the most complex language samples for this and get a greater MLU, which we'll talk about. Free play, just playing with the kid with whatever they're interested in. Just because I have so much preschool background, I would do this. I would take a lot of language samples during our center time when I could just sit down with the kid and just sit next to them as they played with whatever they wanted. And we would just like have conversations about it and I would write it down. And then storytelling, retelling yields the most. So being able to retell maybe their Disneyland trip. We had a little girl that did not talk, but we pulled up a picture of her family trip with her whole family. And that girl was like we didn't even think she could talk until we pulled up the picture of Disneyland and she had so much to say. So it's really like finding what the child really likes is really going to get them talking and you're going to get the best language sample. But it is important to use more than one method. So during play, doing something and then maybe showing a picture of their family dog or their trip to Disneyland, you're going to get some different language structures depending on those situations. So plan appropriate materials, prior knowledge of the child's interests, like we kind of talked about their favorite toys, all those kinds of things. Using objects and activities that they can manipulate or, control. Sometimes if a child just absolutely loves cars and that's all they play with, I mean, you might get a good language sample, but then again, you might not. It's really knowing the child as much as you can to get that. And then have backup. That's one thing I learned in grad school. Have lots of things back up when you plan an activity. Just have other things, just because you never know, like the child, you're not going to get anything. Okay, moving on. Tyler.
I remember when I was in school, our professors told us if you want to get a kid to talk to them about boogers, owies, and farts. And if you give them permission, they'll just say, "Oh, hey, give me permission," and you can get them talking.
I love that.
What are the things?
Okay, so Tyler said,
Boogers, owies, and farts.
Yeah, let
Boogers.
Yeah.
boogers, owies, and farts is what Tyler shared. And what you learn in grad school will get kids talking, having conversations. It allows them to give permission to talk about things they want to talk about anyway.
All subjects,
I
they're
think
experts.
They are experts in that.
And just an adult saying that, they're like, oh.
Especially little boys.
Bad words.
Especially little boys. So collect the language sample in a location that's natural and familiar with them so that, we want children to, students to feel safe. It elicits a more representative and realistic sample of their linguistic abilities. Sample in a variety of contexts, like outside at recess. Maybe they love playing on the playground and they play like imaginary games because kids that age should be doing that. Snack time. But it's always good to just spend time warming up. So if they're not really familiar with it, like going in and doing a language sample right away and they don't know you well, probably you're not going to get a whole lot. But then some kids have no social boundaries and they tell everyone everything. So once again, it just depends on the child. So activities, just engage in real meaningful play activities. Do not try to get to play a game that the child's never played before. Let them choose what they want and just follow their lead. And once again, just plan for various activities, object, whatever. Think of questions in advance. I think that's really helpful, is to kind of have an idea of what kinds of questions. You don't want it to be like drill and kill, constantly asking questions, but there's a natural way to have a conversation and use words like, I wonder, and what do you think, and those kinds of things. And I have a sheet, I'm hoping it'll show up with a link that certain questions elicit certain answers. So let's see, hopefully this will work.
And not yes, no questions.
And we don't want to do yes, no questions. You can't go it. So do you have on a yellow shirt? Yes. Or tell me about your shirt. What's on your shirt versus what color is your shirt? Yes.
I've got a great toy, it's called Magnet Town, some of you may have seen those, where it's got the little shops and the house and all the little people figures and little animal figures. And because it's so broad with all these different types of things, they're talking about their family, what they like to play. It's got the grocery store, little bag of food. And so it covers all these different bases of things. They're going to recognize several things on there.
and then they're gonna play and act it out like it's their family, and they will just talk with that.
That's
So that's
wonderful.
kind of been my go-to toy for language sense. I've gotten so much with that. If you take something like, that's too specific, like blocks, or like,
Mhm.
where it's just about that, you're limited to those sizes, shapes, coloring. But this kind of little people and house figure kind of thing, and Fisher Price toy, something like that, they can recognize their family and themselves in it. And then you get prepositions out of that, do they know in and on and under, so that you get a wider variety of language. So,
Rachel, right?
yes.
So Rachel just shared about, using like this what's it called?
It's called Magnet Town.
Magnet Town, that it elicits greater language samples because it has like families and it has pets on it too, right?
Families and pets and little.
Family, pets, stores, like a community, so it's a lot more open-ended. Cars.
This car has got a fire engine,
So community helper kind of stuff, and so it allows for more to
Is
talk
that
about.
through Super Duper?
It's on Amazon.
Amazon, that's. what I was
Amazon.
thinking. It's on Amazon.
Yeah.
Through Amazon, is it by, I know,
Do you want me to
It
send the
might be
link?
discontinued, I looked it up.
I'm working on it.
Yeah, it's not on Amazon right now.
So find something like that though, so,
Super Duper does have magnetic scenes and things that you can.
and that
use.
kind of thing, yeah, same kind of deal. Yeah.
Melissa and Doug has one, because I have multiple ones. There's like a zoo, and then there's like the
Yes.
family one, and then
Yes.
there's like a
Yes.
community one, and I don't remember where we got that from. Maybe-
But where you've got, again, the different, people and animals and places. And
people.
And they can place a little swimming pool on it, going in the water, and so it's amazing what you can get out of that they know, that they'll recognize, so that kind of a toy.
I think that's great. Thanks so much for sharing. So this is just, I have this link to the PowerPoint, so when we share it out, I put this in my Google Drive, but just some suggestions if you ever need ideas. Location, materials, things that you can do, like age 3, use objects that are appropriate to their age. So like, for example, age 3 is saying books, dress-up clothes, puppets, that's another one to have, like puppets, each have a puppet, and you can do like role playing with it. Sometimes kids who don't want to talk a lot might do it with a puppet. I went to a training, a teacher, early childhood preschool teacher, and that's how she's gotten some of her kids that are really quiet in her class. She has a class puppet that she uses every day to like greet the kids, and it's been able to pull some kids out of their shell, especially if like she gives them one to respond where they typically wouldn't respond or do anything, that it will get them to do that. Of course, be like flexible, in the amount of stimuli. Some kids get overwhelmed with the kinds of things that they have. And then just down here, there's just activity ideas. Let the child, once again, just choose what they want and just follow their lead. And then it has thing on conversational style, like be enthusiastic, not like too, but like enough, like when you're standing there like, hey, tell me about your car versus, oh my gosh, look at that car, tell me about it. It's going to get the child more excited and comfortable to respond. Focus on the child, listen to what they're saying. Let them, we just need to use that wait time, sitting back and just seeing what they come up with when we comment. I wonder what will happen if I put my car over here. And then wait and see what they say. Just giving them lots of time. Ask questions that require to give you more information. So I'll do more of that.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, sometimes with like a student that I'm like waiting for to answer, I'm like, oh, I think I'm gonna jump in now, but then I like have to remind myself like, okay, I'm gonna count to 10 and give them even more time to process
That's
it.
awesome.
Because sometimes it's just that processing.
So Lexi just commented a lot of times, like she's giving that wait time, and like at 10 seconds, she'll just be like, I'm just gonna give a little bit more time. So what do you notice happens when you do that?
Sometimes they'll give out something, or they just have a little bit more time to process and they kind of like give you a response like, I don't know. But it kind of, I feel like sometimes with some kids, it puts that like a little bit more pressure on it. So, or it kind of lays off like, okay, I don't have to answer right now. Or they can ask for like, I don't know. And then you can kind of get more out of them that way too.
Okay. So Lexi was just saying, sometimes it just takes the pressure off, and it's really giving them that amount of time to just really like, sometimes it takes kids a long time to really process what they really want to say. And we know with deaf and hard of hearing kids, it takes them longer than it does a typical child to be able to respond. They really need that greater processing time. So just be mindful of that when doing language samples.
And make it safe for them to say, I don't know.
Yes, and make it safe.
Because I
agree.
will always remind, I have a high school student, late implant kid. And he always feels insecure when he doesn't know, but he was an orphan, like, just kind of had the worst start of any kid I've ever met. And so whenever I work with him, I'm like, there's always a reminder, if you don't know, it's okay. Like, as we're starting our session. And I'm like, I would rather you tell me you don't know than sit there for 20 minutes, because I'll wake you out. You know I will. And so he's just like, okay. And so it's the safe space of like, you telling me you don't know does not make me upset. It helps me understand what's happening in your brain so we can make those connections and I can help guide you to that. But that's all it's doing. It's just giving me information so I can do my job better. I try to make it about me instead of about him.
No, I think that's really good.
We've gotten really where immediately, if he doesn't know, he's like, I'm not quite sure. Could you repeat that again? Or like, we're getting those strategies finally working.
Sometimes you have to do those prompts. So
Yeah.
also just saying like giving the kids the grace to be able to say, I don't know. And like teaching them that to always feel safe to be able to say that. And sometimes it does take some time or some sessions to build up to it, to be like, you know, when I don't know something, I just say, I don't know, or I'll say, hey, can you tell me again? And that's really a great self-advocacy, skill that we could be working on at the same time. So thanks so much
But
for
it can't
sharing.
be a cop out. Like, there are some.
No, there are
kids
some
that
kids
take
that-
advantage.
Oh, no.
They don't want to do it. I don't know. I agree. It can't be a cop out. So just general tips, be enthusiastic, have fun, be silly, get down to their level. It's just, as we know, when we work with little kids, to get down lower, older kids, you don't. Gotta know your age. Heidi.
I think Heather, Marty, was it you that told me about Talk With Me book, that purple? Anyway, I think it was Heather, but she recommended a book and it's a really good book because it, like Rachel said, it talks about like just different parts of the day, like a birthday and then they're at the park and then at home and bath time and anyway, and so I'll use it with my younger kids and sometimes I'll say, okay, I'm gonna close my eyes and I want you to just describe the picture, like what you see.
Yeah.
So that way that's more like they're in the bathroom and they're like in the bathtub and he's scrubbing her hair, you know what I mean? And so I'm like, Jen, I can't see anything. And then I'm like, all over my eyes and see if you're like, you're right, you just said that or whatever, just like you said.
I think that's really great.
Yeah.
So what's it called?
I think it's called Talk With Me.
There's like a talk with me
Purple.
book.
Yeah, and then it has a girl in the little girl in the high chair.
Okay, so
Take credit, but I don't remember that.
Heidi-
don't know.
Heidi just shared how she'll work with a kid and like close her eyes and we'll have the page open and we'll say, tell me about it. And so they have to like describe it with the eyes closed and then she'll open up her eyes and say, I'm just repeating for everyone. And then she'll just open up her eyes and be like, oh, you did tell me about it. So that's a really good these are really great resources. Like we could create a document or something and share out with all kinds of ideas that have worked with that. Be patient, give them time to talk. So we talked about that wait time. And then of course, always respond positively, which I'm sure we all do. And then just be a good conversation model. Sometimes it's just bottling in the conversation, like what you would say and kind of like that parallel talk that you do with a little kid. You might do it for a little while until they feel comfortable. But you get longer and more complex utterances by asking the right questions. So using those open-ended questions like, how do you think that you make cupcakes? Can you tell me like what steps you think we're going to use? I love using the like think because there's no wrong answer. It's whatever you think. You're giving them permission to like give any answer. Or why do you think? What do you think happened? Or I wonder what will happen next. Should we like open it up and look? Those kinds of things. A child will elaborate more on something not present in a room that the listener doesn't know about. So kind of like what Heidi was talking about. Because we don't want to be asking questions the child knows and you already know the answer to. They're going to be like, what is wrong with you? Like, let's take this seriously. So I got this in grad school. This was really good. I don't know if you can see it very well. If you were in my class, I'm sure you already have this, my language class at the U. I love this. This is language and cognition through questions. And you can see right here, we've got our linguistic function of responses. So if we want a child to like name and identify nouns, we would ask, what's that? What do you see? What's that called? And then you've got your structure modeled by the teacher. So that is a hammer. I see a hammer. That's called a hammer. And the cognitive goal would be listing and labeling. So you're working on, cognitive goals here. But if I ask a question where I'm wanting to get adjectives, I'm not going to ask them like, what's that? Like, if you ask a certain question, you're gonna get a certain language function. So if I wanna get something and I'm modeling and I know the kid really needs to really work on adjectives, I'm modeling, I'm using like blue car, the red car, the azure sky, or all those kinds of things. You would ask a question like, or how something feels, like you're playing with slime and you're, oh my goodness, this feels so gooey and gushy. How does it feel? So you're gonna get some kind of, hopefully, a response with using an adjective. And so like, how does it look or feel? Like the hammer feels hard and smooth. They're all, can you tell me about it? Most likely you're gonna get adjectives. It's made of wood. Saws, hammers, and screwdrivers are for building. You know, that would be like, I don't know, that really goes along with it, but can you tell me about it? It would probably be more like the hammer feels hard and smooth. It has a long handle. It's made of wood. And so you're getting different syntax structures for that. And then it gets more complicated.
Sometimes I feel like that you don't even have to ask questions. You can just like, oh my gosh, that is the silliest purple like brown dog I've ever seen. I can't believe, you know, and then they kind of pick up on, oh yeah, that is so silly. That's so funny.
So that sabotage,
Yeah.
Heidi just mentioned using sabotage to get a response of using it. So what was your example again?
Just like, oh my gosh, that is the funniest brown dog I've seen. Like,
She said, oh my gosh, that's the funniest. But you first said like purple dog.
Yeah.
And so a kid will probably be like, that's not a purple dog, that's a brown dog.
Yeah.
You got him to use an adjective. So yes.
not always questioning, but just even comments.
Even comments, I agree. So anyway, just an example of language and cognition through questions. I scanned this. This is like my old copy from like many years ago. But as the kids get older, when you're working with older kids, we've got like linguistic function of response, you know, compounds, prepositions, conjunctions, modals, those kinds of things. And using some of these questions to work on some of this language. Heather, I saw your hand raised.
So I had it drilled into me that your questions versus your comments should be like 1 to 3. You know, like, you don't want your language sample to be all you're asking them a question for their response. I love this because you're able to figure out what kinds of questions can they respond to. So maybe it's that balance between the appropriate questions that you're talking about and then giving them that opportunity to use their spontaneous, like inserting Heidi's comment, you know, or the sabotage or the I wonder statement or whatever. But I don't know if that's helpful for anybody. I don't know if there's any like right way, but we have it drilled like you should not have more than 1 question for every 3 comments coming from the clinician. So
Heather just commented having 1 question for every 3 comments. So it's not just, and we don't want it to be like you're in an interview and you're just answering like all these questions because kids feel that they're so smart and they're not going to want to engage as much. So I just wanted to provide some examples. So, I mean, if you're knowing like, which we'll get to later, like where a child's at, I mean, you can model some of these structures just in your comments, and then you could follow up with a question and see if they can answer with that syntax or the grammatical structure. I love this. We have also different levels of questioning. So we have your very basic ones like, what's that? Who's that? Find the one the same as this versus down to level 4. How can we tell that? What would happen if? Why can't we? Why is a hammer made of wood? Like those kinds of things. And so kind of knowing where your kid's at and what kinds of questions you're using when you're interacting with your student is going to kind of determine what those outcomes are. So I just wanted to share that as well. Any questions about that? Get longer and more complex utterances by using turnabouts. So just commenting on their actions and utterances using just open-ended questions or just comments like, oh, that sounds really scary. I wonder what will happen next. Or encourage longer runs of talking by having them tell, you know, about the story. Some of this is repetitive, talking about their pet or letting them tell you how to play a game. I've done that before. That was kind of fun. And then ways to encourage your child to produce a narrative about a favorite place or person is just starting out with a comment. Your mom says that you had a birthday last week. I would love to know what happened at your party. And so you're not really like asking a question. You're just kind of setting up to allow them to give you like an explanation about it. So when transcribing, you're only gonna record those spontaneous utterances rather than, prompted and imitated ones. And it's important to record not only their utterance, but like what prompted that utterance. So I like to, here's just an example. I would write down when I was in the preschool classroom, like it's really blurry, but just the context on the side. So we were sitting and just having snack at the table, and there were some kids that were painting, some kids were eating. It was one of our, like, what we did first thing in the morning. We had open centers. And I just asked this kiddo, like, what are you eating? And she said, like, I couldn't even understand it. So I put that X and unintelligible. And then she's like, Hilary. So she was trying to get my attention. And so, I mean, that's a skill we want for kids to have, is to like get someone's attention. And so I wrote that down, said my name to get attention. So I'm giving myself context why she said, a proper noun. And then I think I asked her, what do you want? And she said Pop-Tart. So right off the bat, I'm like, okay, she wants Pop-Tart. I'm glad she's using that. But over here on my skills, language needed, I wrote the article. I know she's not using articles. And so when I went back and I looked at this to put it on to like, I wanted to see where she was at with castles, but kind of to look at what are some goals I can do for her IAP. I could see like she's missing a lot of articles. And I'm like, okay, this is a really good goal. I didn't have to like look at castles to know that, but I can see there's a pattern of certain language that she's constantly missing. That actually gives really good information too. So anyway, it was really helpful to see some of this. And then you can see as it went on, she used a lot more utterances. So I wrote like, she commented on a dress. And so she was telling me about, I'm wearing and she's wearing an Elsa dress. And so I did the little, there's a name for it, like the squiggly line, but she was trying to tell me she was wearing her Elsa dress. So I put it in parentheses so I could remember what she was trying to tell me. And then we just kept going, commenting on it. And I said, well, what did it do? And she said, it splashed on me. And so the way that I was having these conversations with her, I just was able to elicit a lot more longer utterances from her. And when she first came, like she was maybe giving 1 to 2 words. And this was her first year. So this was done in January. So when she first started in September, she wasn't giving me very long ones, but that she was consistently wearing her hearing aids and just being in preschool and growing like her language samples. I mean, her MLU like went up a ton, close to what it should be. So anyway, just kind of an example, but just how important it is to make sure you have the context so you know why they're saying what they are. And then just writing like on the side, like what are they missing out of that utterance? Here's just an example of a language sample, like a worksheet that you can use. There's lots out there, you can create your own. Or you can just, have like a table that you create on a Google Doc and do that as well. I thought this was good. When you're transcribing so you don't have this like long running utterance. When they pause is when you're going to want to start the next line. So here's an example. I went to Grandma and Grandpa's house with Mom and the baby cried and I said, stop screaming. And Mom said, don't yell at the baby. Well, most kids don't talk like that. They would typically say, I went to Grandma and Grandpa's house with Mom. And the baby cried and I said, stop screaming. And Mom said, don't yell at the baby. So you're going to want to make sure when you're getting that, you go to the next line when there's that pause. And that would be the utterance. If you can't understand what they say, like do the little tilde or the little squiggly line, and so that you know, and you're not going to count that as their utterance, but at least we'll give you an idea of what language they're using. Because as we know, like language samples, we're looking to see what are they missing. It's good to know what their MLU is. I mean, as kids get older, that's fine, but they still have missing gaps. But little kids, when they're really developing that language, is something that we really want to track. Know the mistakes in the context of the mistake. So like, for example, I mean, if you were just to write this, he's sleeping, you're like, wow, they're using a pronoun and they're using plurals and an ing, but they use the wrong pronoun. So you put it in parentheses. Or the mouse doing, if you put the parenthesis, you know that they're missing what is. So yes, they might have the intonation for the question, but they're not asking the question for it yet. So anyway, there's just more examples for this. just put in parentheses what they're missing. And then I like to write it on the side as well, because then you can see this running list of things that they're missing. I do that.
Oh, Hillary, can I add, like, this a lot in the districts, the speech pathologist is doing a lot of these, but I do it with my listening skills. So if I give them a 5-word sentence, then I write exactly what they say back. And grammatical errors, say, for like A for the, or the for A, that helps me understand that I need to discriminate that a little bit more, like powerful when I'm enunciating it, make sure I'm saying A for not for the, because that's really hard to hear for them. And so, like, even with listening skills, this is super valuable feedback of getting what they're missing when you say it and they repeat it too.
I
So
agree.
even if it's not just a natural language sample, there's a ton of value in even having them repeat sentences.
I also just mentioned there's a ton of value of having repeat sentences so you know what they're missing and know if you need to work on that more, because a lot of times it can tell you where they're, one, listening, but what they're have access to audiologically and at the moment and in the past, so you know if you need to like acoustically highlight that more and give more exposure. Rachel?
Yeah, I put on my reports a little disclaimer at the top. saying that this is not analyzed for speech errors. Because sometimes parents will think, oh, they pronounced all those words absolutely correctly. They may have said like, wow, and I will put brown, but I'll put that little disclaimer at the top saying that, you know, the speech sounds were not perfect, but it was intelligible enough for me to know what it was. So I put that there because they will want to think that all of that was said beautifully, correctly, and it was not. So I'm just saying, okay, this is the words, this is the language that I could detect they were using. And then we can do another IPA kind of a thing to figure out speech production. So it's a different thing. So you have to kind of be clear on that. So they know what they're looking at.
So Rachel just commented that when she does the language sample, she'll put like a disclaimer that she's not working on articulation, that it's the language. And so it may not be clear, but we know what the word is. And I'm sure the SLPs will probably write phonetically, like what they say.
Yeah.
As teachers, like, we're focusing really a lot more on the language, so just writing down, you know, like maybe, like Rachel said, they said the word wrong, but you know, it's, you know, because of the articulation, but you know what the word was, you're gonna write that word down.
There is value though, if you are able to write it the way they said it.
I agree.
Yes.
Because then when we collaborate with our speech pathologist, then I can say, hey, I'm seeing this pattern, like they have a cluster reduction issue, they've got, you know, those kinds of things, and the speech pathologist will be like, oh, I haven't noticed that because they don't talk enough sometimes with me, right? Because they're working on the earlier developing sounds. So, which cluster reduction is super early developing. But I'm just saying, sorry, that it is super helpful to be a collaborating member because speech is really overloaded. And so if we're seeing a kid one-on-one and they're seeing 3-on-1, it's super valuable data to give back to them.
Well, it's just good to say which one it is.
Yes.
If it's just this,
Yeah.
say it's just this. If it's analyzed for the speech sound, say that.
Sure.
So just be really clear on what
Which
you're
one you're
analyzing
doing.
and which one you're doing. But yeah, I agree. You can do it. Give the speech more. Yeah, that's great.
I also just mentioned that it's super valuable to be able to write down what those speech errors are and let the SLP see it so they know and can look for a pattern. So thanks for sharing that. Where are we at with time?
I've even shared like the recorded language sample with the SLP so they
Oh,
can
yeah.
phonetically transcribe it, because yes, I took class on it, but I'm not nearly as can remember that as well as they can. And then again, it's just like another second opinion, like, yeah, I saw the same thing, like you're saying, oh, and let them just listen to it too.
Heidi mentioned just sharing the recorded language sample with the SLP and let them hear it. They can help with that as well. So now you have a language sample, now what? So we want to calculate the MLU. I'm going to hurry this along. We want to analyze a sample, looking for grammatical structures, make note of what's missing, and then record them on the castles. The MLU is a great tool. It's a measurement of their language ability, and as age increases, so does the average number of morphemes used by the child. And when you're scoring it, you just take the morphemes in a language sample, divide it by how many utterances there are. So 100 divided by 257, you're going to get an MLU of 2.57. So, you know, if you're doing that for a 3-year-old, you're like, yeah, they're not there. They're delayed. And so I know, like, for example, in preschool, we've actually been writing goals because there's so much within an MLU. You know that a child's going to, like, if you write a goal, like a child currently has an MLU of 2.57 and a child in their typical age would have like between 3 and let's say 3.5. I don't remember the exact numbers. We'll see it next. They are slightly delayed. And so a goal would be for over the next year, we want the child to increase their MLU by at least, like up to 3.5. And so, within that, you're going to be working on all these different grammatical structures according to Brown's morphemes and to be able to work on that. And it's a more broad goal, but if you're taking language samples like constantly, you'll be able to see that growth and show the data of it. So it should be used only as like the only measure, but it goes along with language samples. Just example, free morphemes, dog, walk, sit, but then when you add endings like ed, ing, like walked would become 2, or sitting would be 2. Here's Brown's morphemes chart. Roger Brown and 1973 identified 14 morphemes that children develop early in their years. And so you can see, like, by age 20 or 26 to 40 months, a child should be using the possessive S. And by 26 to 48 months, I mean, there's a range, they should be using the past tense ed. And so this information can really help guide where you want a child to go. Because we have kids out, that they're not mainstream and they're doing great, but they're still missing some of these. They're not using these morphemes. And is it lack of exposure to the sound? Or they just need more practice now that they have access to that sound? Just being aware of that. So let's, for example, happy is 1. Unhappy becomes 2. And unhappily becomes 3, because you have all the different parts of language, the morphemes added. Okay, so let's just practice real quick. The cat is sleeping quietly. Who wants to tell me how many there are in this one?
6,
7, yep. Okay. Number 2 is kind of easy because I do little spaces. The lion roared louder than the bear. How many are in this one? 9, good job. It's understandable that you are mad about the broken cups. How many are in this one?
14.
I got 14.
It's 14 because the it's.
Yes, the it's. I didn't break that one up when I said it, sorry.
Sneaky, sneaky.
I know, brown stages.
Hey, I just Googled, I wondered if there was, you can transcribe an audio into IPA, and I think there are some apps, so maybe we
Nice.
can kind of look around for a good one. What you get?
Yeah, share it out. Anything to make our jobs easier.
Transcribe audio into IPA. That's how I said out loud. Anyway, I'm like, oh, that would be really helpful. Cause I'm like, oh, I could just use AI or whatever. And I'm like, oh, it won't work if they don't speak clearly. But if I could go right to IPA.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing. She just mentioned there are apps to help with transcribing and the phonetic
Into IPA.
into
Yeah.
IPA. So don't count these as morphemes, like unintentional repetitions where he's like, he is there. You're not going to count that he twice. Those reduplications when a child's like, choo choo, it's only 1. Or proper names, Mickey Mouse, just 1. Like the fillers, like I keep saying, they don't count. They're 0. All right, we'll just keep that. Calculating MLU, we already went through that. So analyzing the language sample. Okay, so let's look at this one. I'm going to pull up, this is a 7-year-old. So what CASTLE form do you think we would use for a 7-year-old? So with CASTLE forms, there are 4 of them. And do we just use it straight off the kid? Like, okay, there's 7, this is the one I'm going to use. Or do we kind of like get an idea, kind of know where their language stamp, where they're at to kind of get an idea. So this kid, let's just look at the first utterance. I like to playing baseball. What form do you think you're going to use? So we've got the pre-verbal, the pre-sentence, the simple sentence, and the complex sentence one. And what's nice about CASTLE is it's all color coded for you. So which one do you think you're gonna use for this? Green or blue? And some kids I found, I will have a green form and a blue form for them because they are like maybe towards the end of the green. And you're gonna find some kids have great language, but they've got some weird gaps. And so you might be going back and forth between two of them. So maybe get out your blue and green ones. All right, so let's just briefly look at this and we'll just kind of practice together. So I have some examples for this one. Let's look at the student's utterance. This is James, he's 7. And his teacher is saying, on Saturday mornings, I like to wake up early and walk my dog. What do you like to do? And he said, I like to playing baseball. So he's getting there, like using some of these like grammatical forms, but it's not like in the correct, it's not using it correctly. So underneath it, I wrote for myself to play, because that's what we would have wanted him to, like, that's what he should be using. So it should have been, I like to play baseball. So the syntactic elements used is where you like look at castles. And so you could kind of see where one, like what age and months that this child is at. And you know that their age is 7. And so they're using this. It kind of gives you an idea of where you're going to like plot them. And then to the right, elements needed, present tense. And also an infinitive, the 2. So we could add that one. Oops. Okay, the next one, he says, I like to go to fishing. So he's trying to use the 2. He didn't use it in the first utterance, but now he's using this other one. So I would have to say this one's like, he doesn't have it down. So this might be something that you'd want to just, not write a goal on, but you'd want to like set up activities and conversations with them just to have practice for it. So I wrote here, I like to go fishing, and maybe I would model that. And elements needed would be like to use, like infinitive, like the infinitive properly. I go fishing yesterday. So here's another really good, like he's now using yesterday, or he's using that. We want a 7-year-old to be using yesterday. But I wrote underneath it, should it be I go fishing yesterday? I mean, he's using a verb, which is great, but it's not the right tense, that irregular past tense. So that's why I wrote I went. So I know in my brain with this language sample that this kid's not using it properly. So a syntactic element that was used was adverb of time. And I would find that on my castles and mark it down. And elements needed, he needs that irregular past went. Okay, so there's like actual training out there for castles, and I know years and years and years ago, maybe Heather went to it. It has not been since I've been here in 17 years. We have not had a castles training. There is actually like procedures. I am encouraging you to use castles as a checklist and as a guide. So it used to be like they had to use it so many times in order to be like emerging, and then so many times for it to be like what's the next one? The generalized and mastered, and then the next one has to be so many to be generalized. I think we can use it a little bit more subjectively. Clearly this child is like using some verbs, and so we're not like overly worried about it, but maybe the tenses is what we would practice on. So maybe on castles you might mark like, I think it's just subjective. So use it as a guide. Heather.
I was just going to say, those of you who just work under the simple sentence 5th edition, is much better description than the like 2nd edition ones. On the inside, the key, the emerging, the behavior has been observed at least once. The mastered in some context, child uses the behavior accurately, but perhaps only in class or therapy. So like it defines it a little bit better for you on when you mark the skill as emerging, master, generalized.
Heather just mentioned, let's see if I can read it. I'm gonna borrow this for a minute. There is a key in the green one that has when you would be marking emerging, mastered, and generalized, and how often you would need to see it. So for emerging, you observe it at least once. Mastered, they use it accurately, but maybe only in class or therapy, so it's not across all situations. And then generalized is they're using it all the time, like home, school, everywhere, church. Okay, let's do one together. The real worm are yuckier, so I don't. The real worm are yuckier, so I don't like them. So what do you notice about this utterance? What are we missing?
Plural is.
Single plural.
Verb agreement.
Is.
Yeah, the verb tense.
The what? I'm sorry, I don't hear very well.
Plural versus singular.
Plural versus singular.
Can you
So we're
zoom
missing-
in on that?
What's that?
Can you zoom in a little bit? Maybe
Yeah,
150?
Oh.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's
A little bit.
Okay. Thanks for letting me know that information. Okay.
Instead of yuckier.
So what about, what are they using? What are some great language forms that we see that, an adjective? Yeah,
They do have copula.
So, so.
Description.
So.
Conjunction.
Conjunction.
It's accurate subject verb agreement.
Me
except
too.
the subject. So, and to me, what I would look at with that is I would say, they know what they should be saying, they know what they're referring to, or they wouldn't use are unless they always use are and not is. But, so that to me still gives me information.
Yes. So they're using the correct copula.
Thanks for the good word.
That's what Heather was trying to say.
Yeah.
So the copula is correct.
Use the contraction properly.
And then, traction. So we've got some good language stuff here.
Pronoun of them is accurate.
So there's quite a bit of stuff here that we could put on castles. So who wants to look at the castles and see like kind of what, age and months that we could put some of this stuff in?
And it's on the green form. 36 to 42 months.
So 36 to 42 months. So this kid's 7. And we're looking at the green castles.
The other thing to consider is if they had made worms plural, maybe they don't hear S.
Yes? So why aren't they
Maybe a
using
correct
that?
sentence. The real worms are yuckier, so I don't like them.
And the worms are yucker, so they're using so they got the so in there, but maybe it's harder to hear the S at the end of a word, you know?
Right, it is. We didn't add in there the imperative. I mean, I don't know how many of us use yuckier as a word, but they are showing that
Mhm.
imperative relationship.
7-year-olds think that a lot.
So where does that have the comparatives or like superlatives and?
I feel like those should be on the green one.
Yeah, I think it is too, 42, but it might actually be on the blue. I haven't looked at these in a little bit.
The plural is the 36 to 42 months as well on the green.
So as you can see, castles can be very time consuming, but I just want you to remember, it's also a great tool because it gives you an idea of where your student is at with language skills compared to their age and what kinds of things and looking for those gaps that you can really work on, because ultimately we just want them to be good communicators, and the better that their grammar is and their syntactical structures, all those they're gonna be able to communicate with their peers a lot better. They're just gonna be better communicative partners. You guys have any questions about castles or anything?
Are there other 5th editions besides just the green and blue?
No. They all
Do they
have
have
later
it all?
editions. We actually have 6th editions now, and now one of them is turned yellow.
Oh, that's right. I don't remember which one it is.
But yeah, so they do have later editions.
So yeah, similar.
Can order them. There's not a lot of changes, but you do get some of those things like, okay, here, we're gonna give you more detailed information on how to do this.
Yeah, the key definitely has changed, and some of the like examples of basic sentence patterns. So the green has definitely changed from the old green.
But even if you're not using it to fill it out for every single kid, just seeing the hierarchy of what's next, if you are getting those gaps and those errors, patterns, just use it as a tool to guide you with what you're doing next.
Yeah, like for the
Even if
7,
you can't keep it up perfect.
it's a lot.
Yeah.
So Also, I'm just saying, using it as a guide, so just to get an idea, like of where your kids are at, knowing their age is 7, but we're like looking at 42 to 48 months, we need to help them with stuff. And the best way to do that, of course, we know like books and activities and games and those kinds of things, and just giving them a lot of exposure for that. Anyway, I am over my time, and so I'm gonna end here because I'm sure we're all hungry and need a brain break. Do you have any questions for me?
That was really helpful. Thank you.
I will make sure that you guys have access to this PowerPoint because then you have the information. So I think Adam's linking him to somewhere. Yep, I think that's it. That's all. So, anyway, thank you for listening.